Hello and welcome to the Polk Pioneer Oral History Program. This is a collaboration between the Polk County Historical Association, Polk County History Center, and Polk Government TV, or PGTV as we like to call it. I'm Lloyd Harris, president of the Polk County Historical Association, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Hunter McNeer, a lifetime resident of Lake Alfred. First, we always like to start off with your full name is
Arthur Hunter McNeer III.
And when were you born, Hunter?
December 25th, 1939.
All right, and we always like to start off after the birthday is tell us about some of your childhood memories about your family, specifically because this is a Polk Pioneer that you're being honored for being. When did your family first arrive or come to Polk County?
Well, on my father's side, my grandfather was born, my name is after, Arthur Hunter McNeer.
You're number three.
I'm number three. He was number one.
Okay.
He was born and raised in a place called Hunter Springs, where that was a family whose last name was Hunters. And a McNeer before him had married a lady her last name was Hunter. And that's how his name got to be, that they used that, incorporated it to get Arthur Hunter.
Yeah, that typically
But
is an old
anyway,
tradition.
he left West Virginia and when he was about 20 years old and went to Alaska for the gold rush.
Oh, wow. Was that the 1890s or early 1900s?
That was 1898.
Wow.
And
did he strike it rich?
No.
So when we watch the movie North to Alaska,
right.
John Wayne is probably the guy that is portraying your granddad.
Right. But he met my grandmother was from Detroit, Michigan. Her father was a pharmacist, and he had carried pharmaceuticals out and originally started in Seattle, Washington, and things didn't go too good there, so he went on up to Valdez, Alaska.
Right.
And that's where my grandfather and my grandmother met. They got married in a chapel in Valdez, a little Episcopal church there.
Right.
Then they moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, and they had 4 boys in Fairbanks.
Wow.
My dad being one of them, Lynn McNeer, my uncle Larry McNeer, another brother Gordon McNeer, and then there was also a Arthur Hunter McNeer Jr. So I'm not a direct in line. My dad was not Arthur Hunter McNeer.
Right, I got you. Yes.
So, but according to because he was called Junior, I could be the third, and I have a son who is the fourth.
The fourth.
And so, anyway, and they came back to the States in about 23, and then he supposedly. This is the story I got.
Certainly, let's hear it.
He bought a piece of property in Melbourne, Florida, that he had bought. It was a mail order thing, and so, but he packed up his family and drove down to Melbourne. When he got there, that property was under 4 feet of water.
So that's the Florida land boom, and a lot of people are buying swamp when they think it's going to be paradise.
Our old Florida land scam.
Yes.
And
so he got scammed in
right.
1923, 24.
And then he had known a fellow whose last name was Raniero, Ernest Raniero,
right.
from up in Bristol, Tennessee, that he knew before he left for Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that he was supposed to have bought a piece of property in Lake Alfred and built a winter home on it.
Wow.
So he says, I'll go over to Lake Alfred, it's as good a chance as any, and see if I can find Mr. Raniero, or maybe he can help me figure out what to do down here. And so anyway, he came over to Lake Alfred, found Mr. Raniero. There were no homes available to rent, buy, or anything.
Land boom, right? Everything's being bought
at that time. and my dad said they actually lived in a tent.
Oh,
I
wow.
bought a house that Mr. Raniero had built for his daughter and her husband right next door to the house that he had built. I lived in that house and have been there for about 50 years.
Was that the same property where the tent was pitched?
Right. Daddy said they lived in a tent.
On the same property, and then they built the house?
Right, yeah.
Wow.
and then a home became available for sale, and my granddad bought it, and they moved over to there. And then when my mother and dad got married, and I came along, I don't know if they were living there before, but we actually lived in the attic of that house. It was about a 900 square foot home. It was an old Tudor style.
And people did what they had to do back in those days, didn't they? Yes,
right,
exactly.
Right. So
I'm very intrigued how they came from Alaska, went up there for a boom, and then they came to Florida in the boom. But does the family still own the swampland? Because that's probably like $1 million acres.
No, I don't know. No,
Yeah,
I don't know. They never
never
touched it, as far as I know. Yeah, I don't know why. I never heard what happened to it.
So the family was in Alaska for about 30 years, and then they came to Florida, to Melbourne first, and
well, they actually came back to West Virginia.
Oh, okay, West Virginia, and then down here.
And then down to Melbourne, and then to Lake Alfred.
Lake Alfred. So that's the journey of the McNeer family.
That's McNeer, and my mother's side is the Lawless side, and they came from Alabama. And they were in Lake Alfred. I've got the date down there.
Oh, that's okay.
But I don't remember exactly, but sometime about that same time frame, probably. And Mr. Lawless was, Lake Alfred was developed as a citrus community.
Okay.
And the people, the founders of Mr. Gardner and Mr. Frumpke and Mr. Johnson and Mr. Goodman, they were North Dakota people that came to Lake Alfred, and they bought it. It was being pitched as being a good area to grow citrus in because
that was
of
the draw.
The draw. That was the elevation and the lakes and everything that were there. And they had bought up 4,000 or 5,000 acres of land, and they sold it off. They advertised it for sale as land planted in citrus. And they were advertising to the people in the North and the Midwest and so forth.
Come on down.
Come down and buy a 5, 10, 20 acre, whatever size piece of property your pocketbook could stand, and you can build your house on that property, and it will be income producing. We will take care of it. We'll pick it and haul it, and we'll
just
sell
want
it.
you to buy it.
And want you to, and you'll get the return off of the fruit. And that's how Lake Alfred was pitched, and when people came down here, that's what they came to saw, and saw was citrus groves.
Right.
And that's what Mr. Raniero had done. He actually had 20 or 30 acres right there.
Was he from North Dakota?
No, he was from Bristol, Tennessee.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Right.
Citrus was the draw.
Right.
And I did take note when I was reading your little biograph that was it your dad or granddad who first invested in some citrus property there in the area of Lake Alfred? Tell us about that. Well,
there was a grove came up for sale between Lake Alfred and Auburndale, and it was a 17-acre grapefruit grove.
Oh, okay.
And my dad purchased that, and I was told, he hitchhiked to Columbia, South Carolina to the land bank to borrow the money to make a payment down on the grove.
It's just, you can't hardly imagine what people used to do.
Right. Anyway, and then and my grandfather was involved, was still alive. Actually, I've got a letter that he wrote to one of his brothers, trying to get him to invest in some country up around in and mining gold.
Oh, wow.
Out in the Dahlonega area of North Georgia.
Right.
And he had gone up there and prospected all through there.
That's Granddad that came from Alaska, right?
Right.
Yeah, he was a gold seeker.
Right,
Yeah.
and he was well recognized. He actually did a lot of different things in Alaska besides gold,
yeah.
messing with gold. He went after copper. He built roads. He hauled people around on dog sleds that wanted to
Wow.
get from one town to one area to another that had never been in,
Yeah.
he's got letters from the President of the United States back at that time for work that he had done.
Right. Yeah.
And,
commendations and
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
right. And
Well,
So
that
we-
sounds like you could write a story just based on grandfathers. And you said he spent 30 years there, I think, in Alaska.
Right.
Thereabouts. So, and he was a developer.
right,
And so was your family, and so are you. So that's one of the things when Dad came down and invested in the grapefruit grove, that was the start, right? Because
Right.
after that, your dad had not, how did he gain knowledge in the citrus
didn't.
business?
He just-
So he's just starting off like we would say
no,
today.
but back in those days they had was where the start of the CGA Association, Citrus Growers Association.
Yes.
You had Winter Haven CGA, Florenceville
Right.
CGA,
They
Haines
had-
City
yeah,
CGA.
all over the county and Central Florida.
All over Central Florida, and you had.
I think Tampa had the same
Yeah,
kind of things,
they had them all over, but they were outfits that had caretaking concerns. Caretaking was part of their deal, and picking and hauling was part of their
Okay.
deal. And they had sales operations to sell the fruit and they had a packing house. Back in those days, everything was just packing house.
Right.
You had few juice plants, but they were, and the juice that they put up then was in tin cans, and it wasn't worth drinking.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until concentrate came along in the late 40s, that the citrus industry started really picking up.
Right. Before that, it was just the fruit.
It was just a fruit
Just
for,
the
for a
fruit.
packing house.
And your dad started off in grapefruit. And how did he amass this knowledge firsthand, right?
just
On
got
the job training.
OJT.
OJ.
And
And that lasts too. That'll stick with you.
yeah. and he saw it as a way that he could make some money, but and he then proceeded to buy. He had developed a relationship with a fellow in Winter Haven that was the CEO of Florenceville CGA.
Oh, okay, yes.
And he helped. They did the caretaking and
Right.
that kind of stuff, and picked the fruit and sold it, and he got.
And of course, your family had an investment at this time with the grove.
Right.
So, and were there any freezes back then that,
Oh, yeah,
that you had to
they
worry
always
about?
were fighting freezes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard you talking about that with the
Right,
deputy
yeah,
sheriff
right.
outside. So, now, Dad, also, before we get to you, you also wrote in your biograph that your dad was also involved in the early trucking
Yes, he
industry.
was.
So can you, because all that's pioneer history to us today in Polk County and Central Florida, back when, as you had recalled, the roads were only 2 lanes in most places, or maybe even a 10-foot road. And, tell us about the early trucking industry and how your dad and you were involved.
The first that I remember him. I was around. I was riding around in the center
Right,
part of
yes,
the car
okay.
with my dad, and the fellow's name I was talking about was Mr. Charles Linebaugh, who was a citrus man that helped Dad in that.
He's the Winter Haven or the Florenceville guy.
Yeah, Florenceville guy, and then they went to a packing house called Great Southern, which was right across the street from the Winter Haven CGA. But that Mr. Linebaugh went to work with them, and they were more just a packing house.
Oh, I got you. Yes.
And my dad went to work with them. Actually, was on their payroll, and he went out and helped procure fruit and
Oh, okay.
buy fruit and run the crews and get the fruit picked and that kind of stuff.
So he basically was in just about everything from being an owner packing, distributing, caretaking.
He ended up being well respected as a person, as a man that could buy, was a very good estimator of a crop of fruit.
Wow.
And
of course
he had people that paid him good money just to go out and appraise their properties, estimate the amount of fruit that they had,
and assess the
when
value.
they were doing things for estates and that kind of
Right.
stuff. But anyway, that's the first trucking business that my dad and his brother Larry McNeer and my mother's brother Winston Lawless, they bought an outfit in Winter Haven called Shipes Trucking. And basically Shipes Trucking was just dump trucks, and they were, by then we had the packing out the juice plants, and concentrate had come in, and they would go around and take the peel after they had juiced the oranges,
Right.
and they would haul it to Cooter Citrus.
Yes.
We
had one of those in Bartow.
Bartow. They
Yeah.
hauled it down there to Bartow,
And they made cow feed.
They ground it up and dried it out and made cow feed out of it. And there was a good friend of ours. His name was Earl Stark. I don't know if you ever knew that name.
The name sounds,
he lived in Bartow.
Sounds familiar.
And
yes.
his son was Bill Stark, and he and I they lived in Lake Alfred for about 2 years in the middle 40s.
Right.
And so he and his son and I became good friends. And in fact, we were playing bridge together up until just a few years ago, and he passed away.
Wow. Yeah.
But we went to, both were at University of Florida at the same time. He and I and other guys from Winter Haven, we were all in the Sigma Nu fraternity at the University of Florida.
That's the Winter Haven fraternity.
Yeah.
Or the Polk County fraternity.
Yeah.
I have here a note that you worked with your brother Richard, and so can you tell us a little bit about Richard?
He came along and he went into the service, and he learned how to survey there, and he ended up going down to Miami and staying with my sister Flo was married to a fellow that was worked for the Florida Citrus Commission.
Oh, okay. Still associated with citrus.
Right.
Now, is Richard an older brother?
No,
younger brother?
he was younger.
And what about Sister Flo? Where does
And
she line
she's
up?
in between us.
Okay, so are you the baby?
Yeah, I'm the oldest. I was born.
okay. You're
I was
the
born in
oldest.
'39. Flo's 43, and Dickie was 44.
Okay, so I just had you in reverse order.
I was
in
born
my
on
mind.
Christmas Day. Dickie was born on Christmas Eve. Used to kid my mother and dad and said, "Know what y'all were doing around spring cleaning time."
That's good.
In fact, my mother was playing the organ at the Baptist church for the Christmas Eve service.
And y'all brought that up, right?
For the Christmas Eve service, and got up and left there and went to Winter Haven Hospital and had me.
Oh, wow. That's something.
But anyway, that trucking company of Shipes, they started and started getting into long distance. And back in those days, everything was controlled by the CDs.
Interstate Commerce
Interstate
Commission.
Commerce, but
Yeah.
everybody had trucking rights back in those days.
Yes.
You had just areas that you could haul.
That's correct. And I used to work in that industry
Right,
and
well,
did
but-
just that, what you're talking about.
Right,
So,
and so
had to have permits to go across certain areas
right,
and all that sort of thing.
And
depending on what product you were hauling.
right, so they expanded that out and had a trucking company, a set of rights that were 200 miles from Winter Haven in a circle,
Right.
in diameter. You could go to Miami and Jacksonville.
Yes.
And then they got another set of rights that went on up into Greensboro, North Carolina, somewhere up in that area. And in the meantime of all of this, my dad had gone to work for Food Machinery Corporation out of college. he hitchhiked his way he went to University of Pennsylvania, and he graduated from there, and he hitchhiked back and forth all the time.
That?
Worked in a fraternity up there, bussing tables to pay for school.
Yeah.
And,
now, FMC had a plant in Lakeland. Did he ever?
No, he worked over in Dunedin.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, and that's where they built the amphibious tractors for World War II in Dunedin and Lakeland.
Anyway,
and California.
He got fired there because the guy above him thought he was trying to move up the ladder too fast.
Yeah.
So he says, "I'll never work for anybody else the rest of my life." And that's probably one reason he looks for buying an orange grove.
There you go.
He'd be his own boss.
Now,
but he rented a filling station there in Lake Alfred and was running this filling station for a couple of years. I remember him taking me up there as a baby. And a fellow by the name of Curry Whitt from Tampa, Florida, part of the Eli Whitt, all that bunch over there is wealthy.
Right.
And he had a tire company that he used to sell tires, and he came by and tried to sell my dad tires at this filling station.
Distributor.
Well, he and Mr. Whitt became good friends over that period of just a couple of years. And Mr. Whitt also ended up having a trucking company in Tampa. And he had trucking rights from where their company went on up the eastern seaboard.
Yeah.
And so they decided to combine the two of them together. And this is, about this time was in the early 50s when Mr. Bostic was started making money.
To make commercial carrier.
And making
Jim
commercial
Wary
carrier,
and
all that bunch. And Lamar Beecham was doing refrigerated transport. But the ICC came in and changed all the because they set your rates, how much you could charge.
That's correct.
And they raised the rates, and so all the trucking companies started making lots of money. Mm-hmm. And so Mr. Whitt and my dad and my two uncles that were involved in the trucking deal that we had here, formed a company called Mercury Motor Express. I don't know if you remember Mercury, but it was all over.
I don't, but that's very interesting.
Yeah, and my dad was the president of that to start with. And then he was spending all of his time, it seemed like, up fighting with the Department of the trucking.
I got you. Yeah, the Department of Commerce.
Department of Commerce, because, they were saying y'all were trying to form a monopoly and all that kind of stuff. And he got tired of that, and he told Mr. Whitt, he says, "I want to get back in citrus."
So the family pitches back into citrus.
Citrus was starting to really come on about that time, and so.
As you said too, that's about when concentrate started really getting developed.
Concentrate was really coming on, and people were going expanding, and the citrus people were, and so they ended up deciding that why don't we get into citrus? So Mr. Whitt and their board of directors agreed to do this, to form a citrus company, to buy land and plant it in groves. And their original goal was to do about 1,000 acres.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they decided to try to do it in different areas, so that if a freeze comes, you don't have all your eggs in one basket, right? So my dad did all of this. Mm-hmm. He went out and found the land, bought the land for the company,
put the trees
cleared the land, planted the groves, and they did a couple of 100 acres in Hardee County out behind Highland Hammock State Park. They did, the first tract was up there above Groveland, and it was a couple of 100 acres. Then they bought a piece over in Hillsborough County. It was about 600 acres. And they bought this piece of property at Center Hill where the manatees were. That was about 1,200 acres of land, but they planted about 600 acres of grove there. So they had it scattered out around, and Freezes still got you.
So you were born in Lake Alfred?
Right.
And
Over at Winter Haven Hospital.
At the Winter Haven Hospital. Family lived in Lake Alfred. Right. Where did you go to school, and what kind of hobbies and stuff did you do as a youngster?
Well, I went to school in Lake Alfred. When I went to school there, we went up to the 8th grade.
Okay, so it was like grammar school.
Right,
I guess,
up through middle
1
school.
through 8.
Middle school.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after 8th grade, then we went to Winter Haven to go to high school.
All right.
And my dad had bought a home in Lake Alfred, and the house had a clay tennis court on it. So I started learning to play tennis. And then when I went to Winter Haven to school, then I got on the Winter Haven tennis team. Played tennis there for 4 years. Played intramural tennis at University of Florida when I went there. Yeah.
That's great. So what year did you graduate from Winter Haven High School?
1957.
So you're a class of 57.
Class
Boy,
of 57.
How classic is that? I'm telling you.
That's the doo-wop days.
Yeah, the doo-wop days. Also, I think in your biograph it said that you were was one of your hobbies was not only tennis, but you were all through the Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts. Tell us about scouting. Where was your Cub Scout pack located? Your Boy Scout pack located?
Well, both of them were in Lake Alfred.
Troop, I guess, is what they call Boy Scouts.
In Lake Alfred, right.
So where did y'all meet, at the church, or where was your?
Well, the Cub Scouts we met in the Cub Master's home.
Okay.
And then when in Boy Scouts we had a Boy Scout house in Lake Alfred.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah.
And did a lot of hiking and camping and that kind of stuff. And
sure, and that was a good area to do those kind of things, all the lakes and the woods and that sort of thing around out and about. Growing up in high school, what'd you do to earn money besides working the groves with Dad?
Well, that was most of it.
Yeah, working with Dad?
Yeah, working in the groves.
Yeah, sure.
And mowing yards, took care of 2 or 3 yards. And then at Winter Haven, I met my wife, Patty Canova.
In high school?
In our senior year in high school.
Tell us about that. Let's hear the romantic story. When was that first gaze? Were you in Latin class together, or how did that happen?
I don't remember.
No particular moment, right?
Yeah, but
I'm putting you on the spot now because she's going to be watching this.
Yeah, we were just in all the functions growing up there, and we went to dances.
Sure.
And that kind of thing, and so she was my high school sweetheart.
There you go.
And,
what a story.
Yeah. And then after high school, I went in the Army for 6 months, came back and started at the University of Florida, and she also started going to the University of Florida. And so, to make a long story short, we were 19 years old, and you couldn't get married in Polk County then.
That's correct.
At that age.
You had to be 21.
So we went to Folkestone, Georgia, eloped up there and got married, and then came back and raised and lived in Lake Alfred. We actually lived in a house, the first house that my grandfather bought in Lake Alfred.
Wow.
My grandmother, both of them had passed, and she had left the house to one of her sons, Gordon McNeer, who was a cancer specialist at Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital in New York. He was considered the #1 surgeon of cancer of the stomach.
Wow.
And he actually operated on Van Johnson and different kings and queens from around the world.
That's amazing.
He was.
You got married, and you were in the military, and then you came back to Polk County.
Right.
And tell us about that when you came back.
We really never left because we were just going to school in Gainesville.
And then coming back home here.
And coming back home.
Well, you're married now. Did you have any children?
We've got 2 children.
Tell us about your
my daughter
kids.
Amy, she's has been married, and she had a son named Garrison. He's our grandson, our only grandchild, to be exact. And he is a cardiovascular invasive specialist in a cath lab up he works in Hendersonville, North Carolina.
Commendable.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And this is their picture here. So, and your daughter is Amy.
Amy on the right.
Yes, and your son is Arthur Hunter IV.
And this is Hunter the IV.
And where's grandson is over on this side.
Garrison's in between me and my son.
What a beautiful family, Hunter. Yeah. That's wonderful. You were in the Army for a while. You were telling me you went to Fort Huachuca. You want to just share a couple minutes about your military service?
Well, I was what they call a 6 months wonder.
Okay.
Only in for active duty of 6 months, and then had the rest of the time was active reserve and inactive. In our summer camps, they would fly us out to Fort Huachuca in Arizona to. We were the only electronic warfare reserve unit at the time in the United States, and Fort Huachuca was the only fort that was at the time set up training for that. Right.
Yeah, and I understand, just for the record, you had 7 years of active
total,
and reserve time in the military. And so thank you for your service, and God bless you for that. Let's talk about you yourself now. We've talked about dad, granddad, wife, kids, college. First thing that said on your little note, your prescript, was that you had started working at 10 years old in a citrus grove. So I'm going to kick the ball there and let you tell me about the rest of the story. What did you do job-wise?
Well, my first job was helping to plant an orange grove, and my dad put me on the tractor. No, excuse me. Before then, I was basically just learned to prune, and back then you pruned water sprouts, he called them, that would grow off up in the inside of the tree, and when as they died back, you would end up with having funguses and diseases get into the tree.
And you learned all that on the job,
right?
From Dad and the other experts in the citrus industry.
And I took citrus at Gainesville, at the University of Florida, and then I also got into business administration and trying to get just anyway. It was just trying to round out my education a little more, and then came back and just. Stayed working with my father, and he ended up having a lot of problems, physical problems. He had 2 spinal surgeries to rebuild parts of his back, and then he had both his hips replaced twice. Right. And he became more or less incapacitated, and I drove him around a lot into the groves, and he and I were always just a team together, so to speak. That was it, really.
So as Dad kind of was getting health issues, you probably naturally just moved into his seat, and took over the business. At that, how extensive was your own orange grove, citrus, grapefruit, oranges, tangerines? How many acres? Where were your groves located?
Well,
what did the McNeer business look like? Is what I'm trying to get to.
At our peak before freezes and diseases changed,
greening and all that sort
we
of
had
thing.
about 1,500 acres of grove.
Okay, that's sizable.
Yeah, and we had 500 acres above Groveland. We had 160 acres out of Hardee County. And then we had probably 200 or 300 acres scattered around the Winter Haven, Auburndale, Lake Alfred area that we owned. And then we sold off some of those, and I continued to take care of them for the people that we sold them to.
Oh, okay, yes.
So,
that's kind of what, as I've been listening to you, that's kind of what Citrus Skies did, right? You're always working somewhere in the business.
Right.
So, yeah. And that's what you've done your whole life.
That's all I've ever done.
And I did note that you became a cover man. You made the cover of a magazine a couple times, and we got some stories on you. Can you tell us about how that came about? Well, Citrus Industry magazine?
There was four of us guys from that we're all from Lake Alfred. Myself and Lynn Miller, whose family had the Lang's fruit stand between Lake Alfred and Haines City.
Right.
And they also had groves, but they had that fruit stand. Donald Sutton, who was with the Shin family, and then ended up buying their caretaking concern was Triangle Grove Service.
I've seen their trucks.
And yeah, and then Jim Hughes, whose father had citrus around Polk County, and he took over his dad's business.
Right.
And we were all up there at the restaurant in Lake Alfred, and they came in and took a picture of us and put it on the industry.
Oh, okay.
We were just four guys.
Well, I saw the cover. It looked pretty good,
Yeah.
and it looked like you guys were having a good time
We
together.
were.
Yeah. So you made the cover of the magazine, and you worked in about when did you retire from citrus work yourself?
In 2010.
So from the time you were 10 years old to 2010, orange juice is flowing in the McNeer family's
That's correct.
blood. Okay, got it. So what a long stretch and commendable endeavor here in what makes Polk County great.
Yeah.
And even though they're struggling today, it's still part of our heritage is the citrus industry. Well, let's talk about a little more social things and church. Where did you attend church, or did you go to church and that
Yes,
sort of thing?
I was.
Kind of share us a little bit about your spiritual life and if you belong to any civic organizations or things of that nature.
I was. My parents went to St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Winter Haven.
Okay, Winter Haven.
I was baptized and raised in that church. And then I also went to St. Albans Church, Episcopal Church in Auburndale, for a while.
And that's a pioneer little church too.
Yep,
It's beautiful,
yep.
right? I've been there.
Yep. And my wife was a Baptist. My mother was a Baptist. My daddy was the Episcopalian, and those two ended up going to Episcopal. And then I was president of the EYC at our at St. Paul's Church in our senior year in high school, and it was a youth group.
Right.
So anyway, and so my wife came on over and became Episcopalian too. So, and we've raised our children in the Episcopal
Wonderful.
Church. Although
And how about civic clubs? I know that you probably joined a couple of those.
Well, I was in the Lions Club in Lake Alfred, and at a period of time when I was president of the Lions Club, I was also on the city commission of Lake Alfred, and was mayor of Lake Alfred at that time, and the chamber honored me with being the man of the year in Lake Alfred.
Oh wow, that's a great honor.
And
what year do you remember the year that you were a man of the year in Lake Alfred?
It was around 84, 80,
okay.
in the middle
or
80s.
mid 80s.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And
how long were you the mayor?
I think 2 or 3 years. That was in
rotating.
It was it's not you're not elected by the town.
Yeah, it's a rotation.
You're elected by the commission.
The commission.
Right.
So you were a city commissioner.
Right. I was
How long were you a city commissioner?
About 12 years.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're involved in local politics.
Right.
And you also love history.
Yep.
And you love Lake Alfred. So tell us about your endeavors in the historical association there.
Well, I
Alfred.
was president of the Lake Alfred Historical Society for the last couple of years. One of the projects that I'm very proud of is that my cousin Ann McNeer was very fond of all of our McNeer history, and she had a man build replicas of the 3 houses that were lived in Lake Alfred in the McNeer family.
Yes.
The original house that our grandfather,
Right.
first house that he bought, then a house that my dad bought, the one where the tennis court is. My sister lives in that house today. And then a house that my Uncle Gordon McNeer, he married a lady whose last name was Evans, Artemisa Evans, and they had a house out on the highway going out of town in Lake Alfred.
Toward Haines City?
Toward I-4.
Oh, okay.
On 550.
Are those little models on display?
Those, and she had those houses built. She passed away, and her brother Gordon McNeer, he has the house that I'm talking about that was the Evans house.
Right.
Anyway, he took those houses there, and then I said, why don't you loan those to me up at the Historical Society, and we'll put them on display in there. Well, he agreed to that, so I brought those 3 houses up and put them. Then I got to thinking, why don't we build some more houses?
Models?
Models.
Yes.
Of other historic homes in Lake Alfred. So at this time, I've gotten built a replica of the Mackay House, which is a big old family that came over from Scotland and built that. They had about 500 acres there at one time.
The early Lake Alfred pioneers.
Right there, and then the Adams estate, which they own several thousand acres of land around Lake Alfred and Auburndale. The citrus was their business. He was I've forgotten what kind of doctor. I think he was a dentist.
Okay.
Yes, he was a dentist. Dr. Adams was a dentist. And so I've gotten them, and my method of doing this was to get my thoughts were to get the property owner who owns the property today to pay for having the replica built.
Oh, yeah, sponsor it.
Right,
Yes.
and then they loan it to the Historical Society, so it's still their house. They can get it anytime they want. It happened that the first 2 houses that I got built were the Mackay House and then the Gardner House, but the city of Lake Alfred had purchased both of those properties. So the city manager agreed for the city to pay to have, and so when they had, I couldn't find the fellow that built the first 3 McNeer houses, but I found a fellow in Claremont that did this type of stuff, and he had done work had quite a resume for doing stuff for Disney World and
architects,
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I got him to come down and give me prices of what he had charged to do them, and our city manager agreed to do one, and he said, let's do the Mackay House and see how his work is. We did that, and it came out just beautiful.
So that's kind of your project,
Right.
and they're on display today.
They're all in our museum.
At the Lake Alfred Museum.
Right.
Wonderful.
And we're working on getting more.
Oh, okay, yeah.
More houses and.
Yeah. And you currently, do you have a position with them right now?
I'm still just on the board of directors.
Okay. But you're active in historical affairs in beautiful Lake Alfred.
All the time.
Wonderful. Let's see what else we got to talk about here. Okay. Do you have any stories about old Lake Alfred, since we're talking history? This would be basically, as a young person, did you know where Old Fort Cummings was at and that kind of thing? What kind of historical things, when you were young, were still around the area in Lake Alfred?
Well, Fort Cummings wasn't there.
Now, I know the fort wasn't there, but it's probably near the lake somewhere down there, I'm sure.
Yeah. We think it was on the part of the Adams estate.
Okay.
And we've actually had a fellow that has the type of equipment that he can look down.
Ground penetrating radar or something of that nature, yeah.
And he thinks he has found the underpinnings.
Oh, that's great.
Of
the old foundations and
right,
stuff.
of that fort.
So you are, Do you ever find any old arrowheads or anything like that? As
well,
a
you
kid?
used to.
Yeah.
We used to walk around the lakes, and
Yeah.
you know, in the orange groves, when you go out and where we herbicide underneath the trees, and you
Yes.
end up keeping that area a strip along the tree
Right.
row. You can find arrowheads in just about any grove if you go out there and walk around.
Anciently, there must have been quite a presence of
Right.
people in our area.
There were.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, a lot of Indians were in the area, and
You mentioned the Mackay family. Some would call it McKay. Apparently, there's a McKay Gardens up there. Can you share some information about that? Or Mackay?
Mackay. Well, what happened is that the developers that came in and bought that piece of the Mackay property, and we had a lady who actually at the time was not involved with the city as a commissioner or anything, but she didn't want to see the Mackay property, the house
Split up
and the
all that?
the you know that they had quite an area of woods around the house and all types of trees that Mr. Mackay had a botanist bring in.
Oh, wow, okay.
From
Yes.
all kinds, and anyway, so she fought to get that property saved somehow, and so she actually took a busload of people from Lake Alfred up to Tallahassee to church and try to get them involved in it and keeping it. And so it's ended up that she got a grant for the city to be able to buy this property from the developer.
Yeah.
And so there is about 30 acres of land of that original Mackay property that's mostly woods.
Right.
And the old Mackay house.
Were you involved in that at all?
I was with her on.
So it's historical preservation
Right,
is
yeah.
also in your hip pocket as well.
Right.
So, well, thank you for doing that, because that's just preserving a piece of Polk County's history that's
Right.
so often everything's becoming subdivisions or parking lots. So commendable, and thank you, Hunter.
You know, it's one of the she's originally from New York, and she was very familiar with Grand Central Park.
Oh, okay.
In New
yes.
York. And that's what she feels like every city ought to have something like that. And Mackay is our Grand
That's
Central
Lake
Park.
Alfred's Grand Central Park.
Right.
Okay, very good. You were on the board for the Polk County Taxpayers League?
Right.
Okay, tell us about that a little bit.
Well, that's just, it was a group of taxpayers that are concerned about what goes on and how, you know, how the county spends our taxpayers, our money.
Yes, so it's an
And-
advocacy group
right.
of some sort, yeah?
Right, yeah.
Or at least in,
And it's just property
Relative
owners
to
from
taxes,
taxpayers from all over the county that are involved in it. And we
are
just,
you a member of that or on their board or
I
what
was
level?
on their.
Okay,
you know.
that's commendable, and that's being all-American citizen. So thank you for, doing all that,
Right.
exercising your rights as an American,
Right.
so to speak. Tell us about your endeavor to bring manatees into Polk County to eradicate or to help alleviate hydrilla and all the vegetation that's clogging up Polk County lakes and creeks and waterways.
Excuse me.
That's
this,
a
this,
story.
this didn't happen in Polk County.
Oh, okay, it did not.
It
Okay.
was in Lake County. We had the piece of property we bought.
It's still interesting story.
Right,
Go with
in
it. Yeah.
Center Hill, and it was in a cold location when we
Here's
bought
the
it.
picture.
We decided that to build a lake along the northwest side of this grove up there to help protect it from cold. everybody, Granddaddy always said, plant you a grove on the south side of a lake on a hill, if there's any way any way possible. Of course, not everybody's got that, but
Yes.
and so we didn't have any lakes up there, but we had.
So you built one.
So we built a lake and
Okay.
For cold protection, and it was built on marshland, and so we weeds kept growing up through the water when we built it to maintain about 4 feet of water in this lake all the time. The dike system that we built around it that's what it was designed
It would maintain
for.
that depth of
right,
water.
to maintain that. And so we felt like that clear water would give off more heat than water full of weeds. So we were running flat bottom boats with a little sickle bar mower on the back of them, and that was slow and not very. Anyway, and my dad had read some information about how down in South Florida, in some of the canals down there, they had started using manatees or sea cows, and they would take them and transport them down there and take a drag line and with a strap and wrap around them and pick them up and drop them over into a section of canal to eat water hyacinths and whatever kind of. Because they eat.
That's what they eat.
That's
yes.
that's the kind of stuff they eat, just like cows eat pasture grass. And so he said, well, I wonder if we could try that up there in our lake. So we had to go through they are a ward of the state.
You just can't go pick up a manatee and move him.
You've got to do it
Okay.
right. You've got to go through a permitting process and get permits to do this. And we had connections with marine studios. After we got the permitting done, we got them to catch us 2 manatees. They brought them over to us on a flatbed truck that had a lift truck bed on it, and carried them up there to the property and slid them off into the lake and to see if they could eat the weeds that have been growing up. And they did, and then they disappeared, and we found one of them. The other one we never found. But they did a good job while they were there.
So they did do what they were intended to do. They can clear out. I think you shared with the deputy about their time frame. About how much did they clear out within a week or 2 weeks?
I had, before we brought them in there, I had measured out and put a fence across the south end where we dumped them in.
Just to gauge how much they could eat?
I fenced off about 10 acres.
Right.
And so when they got in there and started feeding there, within 2 weeks they had just cleaned that 10 acres. All the weeds and grass growing up in the water was gone. And they did a good job, and then we took the fence down and let them go on into the rest of the lake, and they were working on it. They just
I'm not a manatee expert, but you've dealt with them, and obviously you had to learn about them back when you were doing this project. Could Central Florida lakes basically sustain a population of manatees, or do they have to be close to brackish salt water?
I think
that was a key.
That could have been part of the problem. We had a Dr. Funderburg from Florida Southern College. Anyway, he brought his biology class up there because we found one of them that had passed.
Right.
And they did an autopsy on her, and they found that her heart was enlarged, but that her gums were all infected.
Oh my, okay.
And this goes back to the brackish water, the salt water. We think that they came out of salt water or brackish water, and at that time, that salt in there could clean out infection
that we didn't have in
that we didn't have
lakes,
in
yeah.
just plain old swamp water.
Yeah.
And so between that and they also can't stand cold temperatures to a certain
Yeah, I
degree.
know that, yes.
They can get pneumonia, I think,
Right.
if they have to come up and breathe cold air for a long period of time.
Yeah. And of course, just for our viewers, everything you did was on the up and up through Tallahassee. You had all the license
everything had
permits.
to be permitted.
That
by-
way it's not misconstrued when
No.
this is airing on this. People won't be calling you up on the phone saying, well, you shouldn't have done that and all this kind of thing.
No,
Everything was done legally. And this was in the early, 1960s probably?
It was
or
in
late
the
50s?
70s.
70s, okay. Early 1970s. Okay, well that's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish it would have worked though,
No,
because
I
it
do
would have been
too,
nice to have them cleaning out all our lakes around here.
I've said many times, I wish I could be around here 100 years from now when somebody goes out there and digs up those manatee bones. So, how'd this manatee get here?
Well, I do know my dad was in phosphate for 49 years, and some of those big rib bones you get are ancient manatees.
Yeah.
So they're still out there, maybe 35 feet under the topsoil. Well, Hunter, you got anything else you'd like to share with us today? We are so honored with the Polk County Historical Association is so honored to honor you and your family, and especially to give you the title Polk County Pioneer. And
Well,
so we thank you
you
for sharing your time
Well,
today.
I've
and your
enjoyed
stories.
it. I've enjoyed meeting you and being able to talk with you.
Thank you very much, Hunter, and God bless you.
Bless you too.
Thank you. Thank you for watching us today, and we hope that you will come and visit the Lake Alfred Historical Society's museum, see some of the objects that Hunter shared with us that are on display, and also visit our many different historical venues here in Polk County. Thank you for coming to and joining us today.